I'm going to try my best to explain domain and range in a short video. This is just a brief introduction. So the main thing you need to know is domain is all of your x values and range is all of your y values. As long as you know that, it's a great start. Now, when I talk about domain and range, I'm also going to introduce how to use interval notation. Now, interval notation can be a confusing thing for some people, but the one thing I need you to take away from this is that interval notation is not a point. It looks like an x comma y, but interval notation is telling you where does the domain or range start and where does the domain or range end. Now, since domain is all of your x values, if you picture a graph, your x values start on the left. Those are your smallest x values. And then you move to the right, and that's where your larger x values are going to be. So with domain, you read the graph from left to right. And with the range, you start at the bottom and you work your way to the top. Because again, your smaller values are at the bottom and your larger values are at the top of that graph. One more thing. You can either use parentheses with interval notation or brackets, and those depend on whether the value that you're putting in there is included or not included. Now, on this slide, I just used parentheses, but please understand that brackets can also be used in interval notation. So just a quick visual example of domain and range would be this graph right here. If I asked you for the domain of this piece of a graph, this is just a line, I'm asking you, where does the graph start and where does the graph stop with its x values? Domain is x. So, looking at the graph, you start at the farthest left that this graph exists. Now, this is just a small piece of the line. Hopefully you can see that this graph does not go past +1. I drew over the 1, hopefully you know that's 1. So you can see that the farthest left that this graph goes is 1, and then as we work our way to the right, it stops at 3. So the domain is between 1 and 3. It's all real numbers between 1 and 3, because the numbers exist. There are numbers that exist between 1 and 2 and between 2 and 3. So please understand that this includes 1.5, it includes 2 1/3, it includes every single decimal and fraction that you can possibly think of that fall between 1 and 3. Now, when I write this in interval notation, I'm starting with 1 because that's my smaller value, and then I'm stopping with 3. The next part is where you need to be careful whether you use parentheses or brackets. Now, on the left, notice this is an open circle. I know I kind of drew over it, but hopefully you noticed that that point was open. That means that 1 isn't actually included on this line. So it really starts at 1.000001. This line gets as close to 1 as possible without actually including 1. And that open circle is telling me just that. So I'm not going to include 1 in my interval notation, which means I'm going to use parentheses. Now, with my endpoint at 3, that's a closed circle. That means 3 is included in the domain. So the domain would be 1 to 3, where 1 is not included, 3 is included. All right, and then if I move on to the range, that's all of your y values. This increases from the bottom to the top. So if I look at my y values, I'll change colors. If I look at my y values, you want to start at the very bottom, the lowest that this graph could possibly go. That's going to be your starting point. You always start at the bottom. So this line, I just drew through it again, but you get the point. This line in the graph does not go anywhere below -2. So the lowest that this goes, that's my starting point. It's starting at -2, and then we're moving up. The end of this graph is up here at a y value of 4. So you can see -2, +4. It exists between -2 and +4. And then again, you need to decide, am I using parentheses or brackets? Down here at -2, again, I drew over it. I shouldn't have, but it was an open circle, which means that -2 is not included. That means this line gets as close as you could possibly think of to -2 without actually touching -2. So -1.999999999, as many nines as you can think of. And then as you work your way up, it stops with a y value of 4. And because it has a closed circle, that means 4 is included. So this graph does touch 4, but only 4. It doesn't go past it. It does not include 4.1, 4.01. 4 is the highest that it goes. So that's our range.